I'm happy to welcome the President and CEO of San Diego Grantmakers, Debbie McKeon.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is such a pleasure to see you here this afternoon in our now weekly gatherings for conversation. We're excited about the program today because we know food security is really at the top of the minds for everyone in our region, as it is across the state and the country, and that it's on the minds really of our advocates and legislators. So at this time in particular, we know there are huge disruptions in our federal and state programs like SNAP and CalFresh, WIC, and the school meals. They've all been impacted. So we're especially fortunate that we really have a strong backbone of food security and food systems organizations that we're going to talk about today, and that San Diego Food Bank and Feeding San Diego have stepped up, just as they always do. And also that our school districts recognized early on how important it was that students continue to have food, and that they've leaned in on these efforts too. And yet we also know really that our food system is much deeper and more complex, and that workforce and production capacity for our farmers, our grocery stores, our fishing fleets, and others are heavily impacted. Some folks from those areas are with us here today. And that not everyone can access the resources that are available because of systemic barriers that are inequitable, like inequitable transportation, maybe fear and confusion about the public charge rules, and others. So the San Diego COVID-19 Community Response Fund, that's housed at the San Diego Foundation, made supporting this infrastructure its first priority. And we're really pleased that that was their decision. And San Diego Grantmakers food funders are now exploring how they can join in the response efforts today. So with that, I'll turn it over to Megan to introduce the speakers to share more about our conversation and work ahead.
Thank you so much, Debbie, and welcome everyone. I just want to let you all know as we begin that this session is being recorded, so it will be available to you to review later on and to share with others. And also, whatever we're saying here today will be a part of that recording, so please just keep that in mind. My name is Megan Thomas. I am the Vice President of Collaboration and Special Initiatives at San Diego Grantmakers, and it's my pleasure to be here with you every week. And I would really love for us to have the opportunity to start this afternoon, this session, by just pausing for a moment and taking a deep breath. And in fact, if you, like me, have been sitting or standing in front of a screen or a notebook all day, you could maybe use a little movement in your life. So I would invite you to join me on 3 deep breaths and add in any movement that feels good to you and is sort of part of your practice today. So I'll just talk us through thinking about where the tension lies in your body, if you can find that, if you can release it, taking in all the goodness and love in the world with a breath together, breathing in and out. Maybe roll your shoulders, breathing in and out. And the last breaths together, in and out. Thank you so much. It's good to connect with you. It's good to connect with that air, with the earth. And it's good to really be connected with our history and the people in our community. We're going to be talking about food and food systems today. And we'll be talking about that connection to the land, that agricultural land that is so plentiful in our region. And it's important to remember that we are on the land of the Kumeyaay people. This is their traditional and unceded territory, and it is those people who are with us here today who've been harvesting life-giving produce from the earth since long, long before many of us were here. And lots of the folks who are actually in that workforce today left their own countries because of the oppression and violence that they experienced for being a part of their own indigenous community. So having that present in our minds, I'm really looking forward to the conversation that we'll be able to have together today. So we have some wonderful speakers. I'm going to see if I can share my screen here with you all so that I can preview that for you. Oops. I have too many screens open on my screen here. There we go. San Diego Grantmakers is a community of funders here in San Diego County. We're so happy to be able to bring folks like you together. We have funders, we have community-based organizations, we have members of the community who are interested in this issue all on the call today, because we know that the solutions we're seeking really can't be found if any of us is doing this alone. This is really about us coming together as a community to identify the solutions that are really working for us, maybe the things that are not working so well and need a little help. We are on technology, probably all very familiar. The first time I did this, it felt important to walk through all the tech functions. By now, I think we're probably all pretty much experts. That said, you do have a chat box on your computer there, and you can be entering in questions and comments. People often enter in links to things we're discussing. I'd welcome you all to identify yourselves now, say hello, let us know where you're participating from. That's about it. You can see who's participating with us if you click the participant. It'll show up in a list on the right-hand side. This is our very basic agenda for today. We're about through the welcome and introductions, and then we'll get on with our speakers who are giving us their time today out of the very important work that they're doing, and we're so pleased to have them. And we'll leave plenty of time for a discussion. So here we are. This is me, I'm speaking. You just heard from Debbie. We have Nicole Blumenfeld from 211 San Diego to share a little bit of that foundational background about who's calling, what are they calling for, what are the needs emerging from the community. Anahid Braki from the San Diego Hunger Coalition to give us an overview of access in schools and how we're getting food to the people who need it. Ellie Brown at the San Diego Food System Alliance, who's got that big picture view on our overall system of producers, distributors, the many aspects of our community and how the workforce and production and distribution system is being affected. And we'll start to get into a little bit of that resilience. How are we going to be as a community, be as a society when we come out of this? Are there opportunities that shine through that proverbial silver lining that says maybe we can be a little bit more who we wish we were based on this incredible disruption to our systems? And then Nancy Sasaki at the United Way of San Diego County will talk a little bit about how folks are stepping up to volunteer, to distribute food, how we can all get involved. So with that, I'm really happy to turn the microphone, such as it were, over to Nicole. I believe she may share her screen or may not to show us some of the data. And Nicole, in case anybody doesn't know 211 San Diego, maybe give just a brief overview of how it is that you have all this wonderful information to share.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Nicole Blumenfeld. I am a Director of Informatics at 211 San Diego. And for those that are not familiar, 211 San Diego is a nonprofit here that we're 24/7, 365. We are essentially here to answer questions and connect people to resources, whether they're community or health or disaster. And so we have obviously seen quite an increase of demand of people calling, looking for, resources that are not just that are for food or for housing. We're seeing, different populations of folks calling in that we perhaps maybe didn't see before. And so there's kind of a wealth of information that we're able to help kind of provide and give that context for. And I'm hoping everyone can see my screen.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. I'm worried it's going to go out of whack in presentation mode, so I'm just going to keep it in this mode. But basically what I thought I'd do is go through just a little overview of some of the data we are looking at as it relates to kind of food needs and food resources. So like I said, people are able to call in and we can better understand populations of, demographics, where across the county people are calling in. But there's also, roughly 6,000 resources in our database that we're able to provide referrals out to. So what I've done is just started a larger analysis around kind of what do we know about the people that are calling in about food, and really what are the resource options in the community so that we can start to use this data to understand and identify where there are potential gaps in the community. And so when we think about needs, and I believe this slide or some of this data will be able to be provided out to the group. But what we've seen over the last couple of weeks is a pretty dramatic increase in food, specifically food needs. when we first kind of what we're calling our activation, or essentially kind of when we started to really ramp up response and started to see a pretty dramatic increase in call volume, we saw roughly 9 times the typical need for food resources than we would on a typical or an average weekday. And when we kind of dug in a little bit deeper into what specific food needs people were calling in about, it was almost 61% were for what we're calling ongoing emergency food assistance, or really food banks, food pantries, things where people resources where people need food immediately. And again, when we look at kind of the range of needs that people are calling in about, it's basic needs almost entirely in the kind of the onset, right? It's food, housing, shelter. We're seeing an increase of people calling in for kind of financial resources, whether or not that's to pay their current bills or to pay for food. We've also saw double the need for CalFresh assistance. We do over the phone CalFresh applications, and we've seen really in the last month, about 2,700 applications submitted, which is double what we would typically see in about a month. So there's a lot more detail in here, but I wanted to kind of just give the sense that we are definitely seeing the need for food and for both home delivered meals, but also for food banks increasing over the last several weeks. We are also able to take a better look, or a deeper look, I should say, into kind of the food resource landscape. And so what we're seeing is the map is showing really just where resources are across the county. We specifically zoomed in on kind of food banks, school meal sites. So you can see these green dots are the food banks, and the orange dots are the school meal sites. So you get to see that there's quite a nice geographic spread of resources across the community, but perhaps lower, maybe fewer options in certain regions. We are starting to take a look at how can we take this, the need data and the resource data to, again, kind of identify areas of both highest demand and potentially look at how resources are allocated. So again, the map shows you where we have the highest demand for people who need emergency food assistance. See, definitely, and I think that a lot of the data that we look at will match up with census data around where the kind of the higher populations of folks are. But when we start to overlay the data a little bit more with the available services, then we start to see some different trends. So what the map is highlighting is kind of 2 key concepts. So the color is indicating whether or not there are food resources in that zip code. So for the red areas, it's zip codes in which we don't quite know if there are food banks that can offer services for folks in that area. And then the blue regions are areas where there are resources. And the shading helps kind of see what's the relative prevalence or demand for those for food banks. So darker blue areas means that there are resources in those communities, but there's also a high demand per resource compared to kind of the lighter shaded areas where there's a lower demand to meet those needs. And so I think what we're kind of just wanted to convey was that, that the more we're able to share this data and kind of, continue to look into this, and I think we've just really scratched the surface of this analysis, and I'm looking forward to kind of working with our partners across the county to get this data out there so that it can be actionable, informative, and both actionable. So I will go ahead and I think I'm probably around the 5-minute mark, but thank you for having me, and I look forward to being able to share this information more widely.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and we will definitely give folks an opportunity to ask questions later. I know you'll have to leave us shortly, but your colleague Jessica is here. But before we let you go, can I ask if you're able to notice any trend in who is calling in at this point in time to seek information about food? Is it the same sort of demographic or geographic profile of folks who typically call? Is it just more folks? Are you seeing a shift in that at all?
We're seeing a little bit of both. So definitely seeing some communities where there's higher demand. So in the analysis, we've found areas in North Central and Central, such as North Park, even the Mission Valley areas, parts of the kind of the North Central County, where we're definitely seeing increases of folks that are calling in that we haven't seen before, specifically for food. In terms of demographics, I don't think I'll have to follow up with the answers to that. But for the most part, we are still seeing similar populations than what one would typically see. We have a high volume of folks that are low income. I do believe we've seen kind of the same populations, but definitely amplified. I mean, right now we're, like I said at the beginning, about nine times the typical demand, and now we're seeing it leveling off a little bit more to 5 or 6 times the typical demand.
Great, thank you. Okay, well, we really appreciate that. And just so everyone knows, we will distribute the most recent report, sort of overview report from 211 San Diego. And they are monitoring this data closely, producing reports regularly, and we'll be including those on a weekly basis in the materials from these calls. And even if you don't make it to the call, you can find them on our website. You'll get a link in the follow-up email to this. If you happen to have floated on here without registering, go ahead and just let me know, and we'll make sure you get that link as well. Okay, with that, thank you, Nicole, so much for joining us. And I'd like to invite Anahid from the San Diego Hunger Coalition to share a little bit about the perspective from that organization's work.
Hi, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much to Grantmakers for inviting us to share information about what we're seeing. I wanted, just kind of talk generally about the problem here for a little bit. We already had a hunger crisis in San Diego County, and now, I would say it's easily doubled in terms of the number of people who are food insecure. Internally, we've been talking about how long do we think that this is going to be going on, this elevated need. And I've been telling my team, I think we're looking at this through the end of the calendar year easily, based on our economy and based on the types of jobs that people have and what is being eliminated, and the fact that we do have an hourglass economy here with so many people in that bottom portion, in low-wage industries that have been decimated by the closures and the shutdown with coronavirus. Before the coronavirus, we had about a third of our regional population under the self-sufficiency standard. And so if we estimate that that's like maybe 200% of federal poverty level, now we've got, in addition to people who are at 200% and below, now we're looking at more of the 200 to 400% who are maybe like a paycheck away, or just like teetering on the, just maybe barely able to make ends meet, now joining the food insecure population. So I think we need to look at this as a community in terms of immediate response, and how do we build programs and structures now that can create the interconnected safety net of food assistance resources that we have needed here. So I want to share my screen for a second before I start talking about what's happening with the different types of food assistance. So many of you have heard about our Hunger Free San Diego effort, or you came to our event, or you're one of our generous funders. I have to call out Kaiser San Diego, Moxie Foundation, Price Charities, and that was probably a bad idea because now I'm going to forget one of our biggest groups, Vince and Candace Kasparek, for enabling us to work on the data that is now helping to guide the entire community. So when you look at this is the normal hunger relief system in San Diego County. Okay, so about 10% is supported by private philanthropy. I'm going to start talking about the school districts and child and youth meals first. And I really want you to understand what's at stake here. When the school districts closed, we lost almost immediately about 20% of our hunger relief system. That's why it's so imperative that we help the school districts get back up and running and serving these meals. They're serving meals curbside. They've had to transition from serving in the cafeteria to doing a grab and go format. But they're really struggling because they haven't got a lot of funding. They haven't had a lot of guidance from the state and federal. Like they've really been, the resources and guidance have lagged, but the school nutrition service directors are champions and they have jumped into action like from day one. And so thanks to the San Diego Foundation, we're able to direct immediately $300,000 from the COVID relief fund. The San Diego Foundation actually granted that money to the Hunger Coalition, and we're granting it out directly to the school districts. We partnered with a few other groups that are normally our close partners in this work, the County of San Diego and Childhood Obesity Initiative, CHIP, and UCSD Center for Community Health, with some advising from our board member, Gary Patel from San Diego Unified, to figure out how to disseminate these funds across our 42 districts. So I'm just gonna leave this up for a little bit while I talk about what funders can do in this arena. So the school districts need equipment and supplies to do safe food distributions. And we need to get the word out that these meals are available. School districts are, as the CDE and USDA slowly puts out new guidance, the school districts are now able to serve multiple meals at once. So San Diego Unified is giving out 5 days worth of meals at once. Now they can do the breakfast and lunch, and they can add the supper and a snack through the 2 different programs and serve that all at once. And so, these are fully funded meals that are already out there, and there's no way we can make up that gap with philanthropy and the food banks and the pantries. So please keep this the districts in mind, and opening this flood of healthy meals back into the community as you're thinking about how to fund during this response time. In the area of CalFresh, the state, you may have heard of some of these things. I'll just mention a few details. So right now, everybody who is on CalFresh has been increased to the maximum amount per person, which is $194 per person per month. And so that's happening. That happened in March and April, and this may be extended. We hope it is extended. The best way for people to apply is through getcalfresh.org. Which is a simplified application channel. And I would say if you want to help, so again, look at the portion of the pie chart here, right? I mean, what funders can do is help to support CalFresh application assistance. So we're helping to connect, so 211, as you know, is a huge player in the application assistance arena. They're very short. They're short on staff. Everyone's short on staff. This is hitting all of our partners. We have a lot of application assisters who can work with 211, but they're missing because of the loss, the hits that they're taking in other ways. Sorry, this is a little technical, but the state reimburses them 1/3 for their CalFresh application assistance. The rest has to be non-federal. The federally qualified health centers who do a ton of CalFresh application assistance don't have that match funding, so they need that 2/3 match. So $40,000, $50,000 or something to support a CalFresh application assister in a community health clinic to work at 211 is going to be a huge, huge help. On the area of senior meals, you might all know that there are no more congregate meals of any type. So senior centers have moved to a grab and go. And again, they're facing a lot of the same challenges as the school districts in that they don't have the equipment and the supplies and the packaging and that kind of thing to be able to transition to this type of meal service. Probably one of the biggest things I mean, it's hard to say what's the biggest hit that we're taking for the hunger relief system, but the loss of volunteers is a real problem. So many food bank distributions are done by volunteers. The food banks distribute the majority of their food through their pantry partners, and so many of these pantries, I think half the pantry partners are churches, and most of them don't even have a paid staff person. So I think something else for the funders to think about is how do we coalesce the volunteer efforts, because there's a lot of little things happening, but we need to have a little bit more coordination with connecting available volunteers to the food system, to the hunger relief sources. The WIC is also struggling. WIC has gone completely remote, just like the County of San Diego has gone completely remote with the CalFresh and CalWorks and Medi-Cal application assistance. WIC is struggling because a lot of their workers have small kids at home. They're facing illness. We're hearing from a lot of those providers, and WIC doesn't have a table. Like, we run the CalFresh Task Force, so we're, WIC doesn't really have an entity looking out for it. So there's 5 different entities that distribute WIC. And so if you're interested in helping to support WIC, you would have to just reach out to each of them independently. I can provide more information on that, or I bet Megan has that information as well. And that's WIC, senior meals. Oh, because of what's happening with the grocery stores and the things that we're all experiencing, what that means for organizations like Feeding San Diego, which primarily distributes product from, fresh rescue from the food banks and that kind of thing, they're running out of product and they are needing to buy food. Even the San Diego Food Bank that gets so much from the government is also needing to purchase food. Probably the biggest bottleneck is the pantries missing their volunteers. So that's another area where we're going to be providing some assistance to the San Diego Foundation to just understand, like, how can we create a regional network with numerous layers of pantries, big providers. How do we loop in the volunteers and the resources? So it's something that we're looking at. If people are interested in learning more, please feel free to contact me or contact the San Diego Foundation.
Thank you so much, Anahid. We appreciate that. And I just want to highlight, unless in case it was too subtle, is that the San Diego Foundation is working very closely with the nonprofit organizations in the community, and particularly with San Diego Hunger Coalition, to figure out what their strategy is in this initial focus on food security. And to me, and I'm happy to hear a little feedback from Anahid, but to me, for funders, and for the work that San Diego Grantmakers does to really promote this idea that the folks who are impacted, the folks who are doing the work, know what the solutions are and have really great projects in hand, work to be done. They're in touch with the communities, and so it's really demonstrating that commitment to the community in action rather than coming up with a solution and sort of tossing it out there. Do you want to just share a little bit about that partnership, Anahid, how it came about and what you're learning from it?
Sure. I mean, it's fantastic. I mean, I think I don't know, not everyone on the call knows me, but I did, I started my career in the nonprofit sector at the San Diego Foundation. I worked there for 5 years. I spent 10 years as in the philanthropic sector, and most of that as a program officer. So I do have grant making experience. And I think that's maybe a piece of why we felt comfortable doing that. I've known Connie for a long time, ever since she was on the board and I worked there. But I would say in general, I'm seeing these kind of partnerships across, across the board. And we have so many collaborations, so many healthy nonprofit collaboratives, and you're going to hear from an especially healthy and successful one next with Ellie at the San Diego Food System Alliance. The nonprofits are coming together. We are talking constantly. And so, come to any of the collaborative heads, any of these groups like ours that are that bring other groups together, and we can share for you the landscape. And we're happy to share it. We're here to support our partners, so you don't have to feel like you're going to be on the hook to fund us. We're happy to tell you about other needs in the community besides our own.
Perfect. And I'm improvising here a little bit since we're doing so great. We have a question from Benson asking if you can clarify what the individual entities that support WIC are.
Sure. Let's see. So it's a little disjointed. If anyone wants to fund us to create a WIC table, we will someday. I would say it's the San Diego Research Foundation has a WIC office. American Red Cross has a WIC office. Why don't I they finally did create a common site where you can find the office that's closest to you. but it is a little confusing for even people in the community. So let me find something and I'll put it in the chat.
Okay, great. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
And with that, I'm happy to hand over the virtual mic to Ellie at the San Diego Food Systems Alliance to take us a little bit step back from the distribution of food, which is so important, and think about how that food gets into those hands to begin with.
Hey, hi everyone. Thank you so much, Megan, and thanks for the shout out, Anahid. Really appreciate San Diego Grantmakers for this opportunity to share insights about what is happening across San Diego's food system. Really appreciate the system level view that you're taking about this, and really excited to share. So San Diego Food System Alliance is an organization, a network organization that's committed to building an equitable and sustainable food system in this region. But we work with a powerful network of diverse stakeholders in our community, and what we're hearing across our network is that really this pandemic and the social distancing order is creating disruptions across the food system, as you can imagine. Dramatic increases in food assistance needs, like you heard, closure of food service businesses, layoffs and furloughs of workers in the system, with significant portion being immigrants and communities of color. And farmers and fishermen in our community needing to rapidly shift their sales models, if at all possible, to try to stay afloat. And this crisis is really exacerbating and exposing the existing already current vulnerabilities, as well as exacerbating the inequities of our system. And there is a critical need to invest in support systems into the future, similarly to what Anahi was saying about the need to create better support systems. It is across the entire food system. So 211 and Anaheed Hunger Coalition, who happens to be one of our founding members of our network a decade ago, covered food security issues and efforts underway. So I'm going to be focusing a little bit more on other aspects across the food system, impacts to our food producers, local farmers and fishermen, and workers. So first, with food production, when we're talking about farming and fishing communities in San Diego County has over 5,000 farms, and a significant portion is not edible, and it employs over 22,000 people in the system. And our fishing industry, our local fishing industry, employs over 300 individuals. So due to the business closures, additional market access, such as restaurants, institutions, and many of the farmers markets are no longer available. And so farms with diversified produce who had direct to consumer channels set up like CSAs and farm stands are experiencing a significant demand, while producers selling to wholesale channels are having struggles. Farmers and fishermen in terms of pivoting their sales models and moving and selling their product. We really do not, unlike other regions across the nation, we don't have the infrastructure for aggregating and distributing products in this region to address this type of crisis from a mission-oriented standpoint. So that's one of the major challenges. And additionally, farmers currently don't qualify for loans from the SBA, which is currently trying to be fixed at the federal level right now. So because they don't qualify for loans, they are really struggling to pay their rent, utilities. It is a dire situation. And why this is so important, I just wanted to emphasize why this is so important, supporting our local farmers and fishermen. They are the lifeblood of our community food system. And they are the reason why our kids know where the food comes from. The longer the distance our food travels, the less trust that we have and the negative impact on our environment. And the trend has shown that once we lose ag land in this region, it is forever lost. We've lost, in the last couple of decades, a tremendous amount of ag land, and it never comes back for agricultural use. So we have to support our local farming and fishing communities and the livelihoods of these small businesses. It's vital. Secondly, with farm workers, nationally, their average salary is about $12,000 a year. And these individuals are the most isolated and vulnerable individuals in our community. As farms continue to lose their revenue, farm workers will struggle further. There was a recent New York Times article, and the name of the article, "I Harvest Your Food Why Isn't My Health Essential? I really recommend you read that article, but it talks about how we rely on farm workers to provide the food that we all need to survive, and they are considered essential at this time, but they're left out of government support. Many are undocumented temporary workers, and government corona relief funds require a social security number, so many don't have access to health care. They receive little information on how to protect from the virus, and also may be impossible to protect from the virus due to the living situations. And on top of all these vulnerabilities, the federal administration is now proposing to lower farm worker pay. But fortunately, California workers may be protected from this. So thank goodness for California. Food workers in general, we have over 200,000 individuals in San Diego that are employed in the food system, including farm workers. So as you may know, food services and drinking places accounted for the largest number of job losses in America from the coronavirus. Food service workers receive some of the lowest wages in any of the occupation categories and are already very vulnerable to economic insecurity. So shout out to Anahid. Some of the data on this, Hunger Coalition collected pre-pandemic, 55% of the food insecure individuals were Hispanic Latinx, and 55% of the food insecure individuals were working individuals. We know that many of these individuals work in food services. So that just illustrates the existing vulnerabilities being exacerbated by this crisis. I wanted to take this time to share a few things that I think the funding community can do in terms of response right now, but what we can all do at this time as well as consumers. So recognizing that a lot has been done by many great individuals on the phone right now. But here are some suggestions, couple suggestions. Continue to support relief funds for those in the food system that government programs are not reaching. Farmers, fishermen, temporarily guest or undocumented workers. Farmers are currently eligible for the SBA loan, like I mentioned. Governor Newsom just announced a fund for undocumented workers, which is great, but we know that more help will be needed. Second, invest in our regional food economy. Buy from local farmers and fishermen. Some of the markets are still open, and you can also buy directly from them as well. Invest in the ability to aggregate and redistribute products in our community. Third, support advocacy efforts in general to defend the needs of those that are most vulnerable in our food system. Low income, communities of color, consumers, food and farm workers, small businesses. I also wanted to share that we have a COVID resource page on our website for more information on ways that we all can take action. And we're publishing an issue brief next week on COVID-19 food system impacts and opportunities for local policymakers and funders. So I'll put a link in the chat for the resource page. That's where we'll be updating the issue brief as well. So final thoughts from me. Really, I think the silver lining is that, I believe everyone is now hyper aware of what a food system is, if they didn't know before, where our food comes from, learning about local farmers and fishermen in this community, as we all kind of struggle to figure out how do we get the food that we want. There's been a resurgence of the Victory Gardens movement, where people are looking to grow their own food in their gardens and spending more time in their own kitchens. But now really is the opportunity to have a conversation about how can we uplift our food system so that we can build one that's sustainable and just. In many ways, the solution lies in the purchasing power of consumers to pay for and support a food system that we'd like to see for those that can afford it. We should be voting with our forks. And lastly, we are really at an interesting time because our organization is now developing a 10-year vision for San Diego's food system, San Diego County Food Vision 2030. And we know that it will take time for the food system and San Diegans to recover from this crisis. Anahi said by the end of the calendar year, after the Great Recession, it took several years for food insecurity rates to go back to normal again. We also know that this is not an isolated case. This disaster is not an isolated case. extreme weather events, and public health issues will continue to worsen due to climate change. And we need to plan better for the future. There's a critical need to invest in support systems into the future, stronger safety nets and infrastructure for a resilient and nimble community food system. And we have to build capacity to prepare, respond to, and adapt to future catastrophes. Thank you so much for listening and supporting our food system.
Thank you so much, Ellie. I do want to throw one quick question at you, since it was in here, that was see if you know what percentage, you referenced the fact that our food system produces some edible crops and some inedible crops. Do you know the breakdown on that?
I don't have the figure on top of my head, but I believe about 50% of the food production currently is nurseries, so not edible plants.
Perfect. And Anahit, I think that link you put in probably has the answer.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. It's a good one.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Great. Well, thank you for that, Ellie. And we talked at the top of the hour about sort of tracing an arc towards what folks could do. And Anahit and Ellie have been giving some good examples of what needs funding and how to be thinking about your intervention. But Nancy Sasaki, who's the CEO of the United Way of San Diego County, has been really on the front lines along with her team and in partnership with any number of organizations and individuals in our communities to make sure we're getting the food we have out to the folks who need it. And she's joining us here today. Thanks so much, Nancy, to talk a little bit about that effort.
Thank you, Megan. And I just wanted to add in a few comments about what I'm seeing out in the community and around food distribution. We do have a food distribution on site at United Way, and just looking at all of the other things that are happening, there's certainly a lot of money going into food and food distribution efforts because people recognize that's one of the most immediate needs that people have when everything else goes away. They still want to know that they can eat and feed their children. So it's been huge. But what I've also seen and hearing from the community as well is that, so one thing I see is I go out to the food distribution sites, and I've been on a couple of weekends when either the food bank or Feeding San Diego is doing a food distribution. They have a limit. They usually can handle between 1,000 to 1,200. We started out at 500 and have gone up to 1,000 to 1,200 cars that come in and keeping everything safe and everything that's possible. There's still people that are turned away. And when I walk away, it breaks my heart that people have been in their cars for however long they were there. In an hour and a half, we go through 1,000 to 1,200 cars. Food is gone, and we turn people away. But that's one place that they can go. There's a lot of food distribution sites all around the county. So food is what looks like to be fairly readily available. But if you looked at a lot of the food sites, they've got certain hours that they're actually open and distributing food. You might need to call to make an appointment. It might be mostly during the daytime hours. There's even the schools that are distributing food or giving food out for the kids, and it's mostly daytime meals. So like, where are people getting their nighttime meals? I'm hearing that a lot in the community. Also hearing a lot from people that don't have cars, don't have the transportation to go and pick up the food that's there. They don't have the opportunity to go to the markets and pick up food there. So food still becomes an issue. And as much as we give to the food banks and to the Feeding San Diego, and I'm not going to say don't give to them or continue to give to them, because that's where a lot of the food comes from. But it's also looking at what more can we do to make the distribution sites more readily available, and at times that people can really access them. And also recognize that the money that goes to the food bank provides the food, that all of these organizations that are running distribution sites are not getting funding to actually run the distribution sites. And we've all had to incorporate more protective gear, more safety regulations, making it more cumbersome for people to come in and pick up food. So there's a lot of costs that are associated that are not getting spread down from the money that's going to the food bank and to Feeding San Diego. So I think that's really also an important issue to think about. So that was really mostly about what I wanted to say, was that recognize there's a lot of money going into food, but that doesn't mean that we've really impacted the food distribution system in a way that people who are most in need can access that food.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And I'm going to put into the chat box right now, oops, not that one, the website for a mutual aid effort called We All We Got San Diego. And the idea here is that, Nancy's going to say something else. The idea here is that those formal pathways don't necessarily get to our most isolated, marginalized, vulnerable populations, whether it's an elder who isn't able to leave the house, or someone who, for whatever reason, doesn't feel comfortable accessing some of the formal pathways. So check that out. It's a group of individuals who've organized themselves to support the community throughout the county, and they have more than 1,000 volunteers working with them. Nancy, please.
Yeah, and it kind of follows on what you just said, is that there are a lot of volunteer opportunities out there to help at the food distribution sites. I know that Feeding San Diego and the Labor Council are doing every Saturday at Qualcomm Stadium or SDCCU Stadium in the parking lot. But there are a lot of the other distribution sites are looking for volunteers, although they also have to understand the protective gear and everything else that needs to go into play there. But there are a lot of things that you can do to help out, to help people get food.
Yeah, thanks so much. And Nancy, the United Way has a great webpage on how to volunteer and where in-kind donations are being collected. And I've put that into the chat box, and we'll be sure to share it with others. I know a couple people are on the phone here. And we have a few minutes for Q&A. I know we've been doing that throughout, but if anybody would like to ask a question of any of our panelists, our speakers, please feel free to go ahead and just do that. Otherwise, I'm going to ask questions. Well, let me start here. And if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the chat box or just pipe in. Ellie, you started to touch on this at the end of your remarks. And I think it's important for us to recognize that we have this worldwide structural disruption, right? And so if we think about the fact that food security is largely a function of who you're born as, right? So it can be traced geographically, it can be traced along the lines of race and ethnicity. There are very much systemic reasons that people more easily fall into food security, income security, and things of that nature. And just by the fact that we have disparities in who is hungry, who's losing their job, and where all this food is going, by the fact that we have food waste to begin with, and yet people are still hungry, it tells us that there's something wrong with the system. Is there anything that all of you who've been speakers, or even anybody who's on the webinar with us, is seeing where you think these solutions that we're putting into place now are something that I'd like to see extended and made permanent when we rebuild a new way of thinking about how we distribute food in our community? Anahid, you're unmuted.
I would like to believe that this is going to move us toward universal basic income a decade at least before it might have happened otherwise. There's no other way around it. I mean, we don't have an economy that supports the basically the low skills of so many community members. We don't have a skill matchup with our economy, I should say it that way. So that is a positive. And I would say that we do need to have a safety net that is more integrated. And I think, the downside to a crisis like this is that we see all the gaps and we see how it's not integrated. But on the positive side, whatever funds are given to strengthen the food distribution network mean that 5 years down the line, when another family falls into hardship, that they can immediately get what they need and come back out without falling deeper or continuing that experience. So I see that I think it's a bright spot. The levels of coordination, I think, are going to continue to exist.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah, I would add to that. I would just add on to that, Anahid, that I think that it really has identified in so many different ways, not just within the food system, a lot of the gaps and the inequities that exist in our community. And I'm hopeful that we will really explore those and dig into them and see how we come out of this creating a system that is more equitable in terms of food distribution and food access.
Great, thank you. Ramon, you have a question. Please go ahead. We'll give you a second to find your mute.
Sure, got it. I have a question about kind of the long term in the future. You know, I look at our food system. So much of our food is coming from out of state or out of the region. And I look at how many of our kids are being impacted by this, particularly in low-income communities, right? And working with kids in the past and seeing how many of our kids are not familiar with, you know, a lot of things that grow out of the ground. How crazy is it to think that we can start basically teaching our kids to grow their own food at schools and using schools as a way to kind of, as almost like small farms, right? Is that something is that possible? Is it so that we can have in 20 or 30 years a large amount of adults that know how to grow their own food, that can start, you know, maybe, you know, launching city and urban farms and growing food from home and stuff, so that we're not so dependent on this system that doesn't necessarily serve their needs, and in a lot of ways makes them sick, right? So
Thank you so much for that. Ellie, do you have I know you know lots of folks working in this area.
Yeah, I can try to address that. There's examples of projects happening in various different school districts led by food service directors that, you know, out of their personal passion and will to create these projects in these different school districts and different school sites on urban agriculture, aquaponics, different things, and also incorporating food curriculum into schools. But that is done through the personal often done through the personal passion of a single individual or a group of individuals in that, you know, from their personal perspective. It's not done from the systemic level that we'd like to see, obviously. Really, I think that the deep issues in our food system is corporate consolidation across the food system. A couple of the major food and ag companies really control the food system in many ways, and they have a lot of influence at the federal level in terms of what gets supported, what gets subsidies, the commodity commodity products that get subsidies, and not the vegetable and fruit farmers. So there's just a lot of changes that need to happen at the federal level. And how do we build that political will to create that sea change at the federal level? It requires a very progressive administration, unfortunately. But I do see glimmers of hope. What Anahi was saying with universal income and this crisis shedding a light on a lot of these inequities, and people realizing that farm workers are essential. You know, pretty ironic. A couple months ago, they really didn't. The administration didn't feel that they were essential, but now they're essential. They're qualified as essential. So I think it's really a value-based perspective on the food system before profits, and that's what needs to happen at the federal level in order to see every single school district in this nation embrace food as a key curriculum in schools, and to be able to place the value, the quality of food before profits. So unfortunately, I didn't have a very hopeful answer there, but I do see changes happening, and change is slow. Of course, when you're talking about the federal level, change is very slow, but I definitely do see that happening. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the racial disparity issue. I think, you know, there's been a lot of harm that has been done in various different communities. And I believe in order to right the wrong, we need to undo the harm and build wealth in communities, and community wealth building, reparations, that needs to happen in order to level the playing field for communities to be able to thrive again. So in addition to affordable housing, universal income, there needs to be uplift these various different communities. And I do see the crisis shedding more light on the inequities, and I think that's the hope.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ellie. I appreciate that. Well, with that, I'm going to go ahead and bring us into the home stretch. Thank you all so much for being here, for asking these great questions, for all the work that I know you're doing, whatever role you play, whoever you are, whoever's in your family and your community. We are all relying on one another at this point in time, and it's beautiful to see our community coming together. I'm going to share my screen here. So for folks on the line, who are funders. I can never tell what screen you're, hopefully you're seeing my slides. Somebody confirm you're seeing my slides. For folks on the line who are funders, one of the things we're attempting to do is track where funding is going so that we have a good, as close to real-time picture of where the need remains. And so if you could check out this website as you're making grants, input your information, or just reach out directly to me and I'll help make sure that your information gets included. What Candid is doing, which is a partner of ours of Philanthropy California here in the state, which is our statewide alliance with our sister organizations representing about 700 different philanthropic institutions in California. They have a really amazing mapping and data tracking and data analysis information. So reach out to me if you're not already recording your contributions through this tool so that we can move forward together with the best information. So with that, we come to the end of our now funder and community update on a weekly basis. Next Thursday at 3 p.m. we will be right back here again, and we're really happy to have Scripps Research join us. Dr. Peter Schultz will be with us to talk about the science of COVID. We're going to take a little bit of a move into a different area to start to understand how we're approaching the therapies, the treatments, and eventually the vaccine for this, and then what that will look like out in the community. Scripps is itself a nonprofit organization being funded in large part through philanthropy. It's doing some amazing work, not just for us here in the community, but for people around the world. So please join us. You'll get an email from us. It will come to you with a little survey. Feel free to send any feedback on that. We'd love to hear. It will come with the resources, the recording, and anything else. I hope to connect with you all again soon. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you very much. Wishing you health and peace and a wonderful rest of the day. Take care.